That's for you. Yes.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And thanks for joining today to speak about a topic that's unfortunately, obviously, more and more relevant. And we're honored to be joined at Barnert by one of the leading advocates in the fight against anti-Semitism. The Anti-Defamation League is the leading anti-hate organization in the world, and Scott Richman is the director for ADL's largest regional office covering New York and New Jersey. The work he oversees includes incident response, anti-bias education, legislative initiatives, educational programs, fundraising, and leadership development, all designed to fight anti-Semitism and combat hate in all its forms. He is an experienced advocate dedicated to developing community partnerships and initiatives that provide justice, equality, and fair treatment for all. I can tell you from following Scott on social media that he's absolutely everywhere. In the last few weeks, I've seen him with Governor Hochul and Mayor Adams of New York City. Scott, thanks for the work you do for the Jewish community and taking the time to be with us today.
I think it was on. Is it on? Yeah?
It is on.
It is on, okay.
Is it loud enough? Yeah? And if you're joining us on live control, Rabbi Scheffler is looking at the chat as well, so if you are having trouble hearing us, or when we get to the Q&A portion of the morning, if you have questions or anything comes up, we do have eyes on our live control chat as well. So we're glad you're here, wherever you are here with us. And I think it's just always for sort of painting context. If you're joining us from home, there are 7 tables set up of Barnert folks here, and feels nice and full. So we miss you, and we also want you to know that we're here in good numbers and happy to be together. So thank you so much for joining us on this cold January morning. My role here today is just to ask questions and keep the conversation moving and allow us to learn together. When you and I spoke to prepare for this, it was really so helpful just to sort of wrap my head around all the work that, we see the ADL's name everywhere, and we have a sense sort of, as Matt mentioned, of sort of all the places you are, but really to get to dig into so much of the sort of on-the-ground stuff that you're helping us to deal with. So if you could just start maybe by way of giving some context for what the ADL does, and then we'll sort of dig into the meat of the conversation.
Thanks so much, Rabbi, and thanks to Matt for introducing me, and thanks for inviting me and for coming out for not the easiest topic to discuss, anti-Semitism, but an important topic. And it's great to have so many cousins at one table here. It's very nice. A little bit of a cheering group here. So ADL. So I've been the director of ADL's office covering New York and New Jersey for 2.5 years. I came to this organization after many years of being a Jewish professional in other organizations. And what attracted me to this organization is some of the things I'm going to tell you about ADL, at least from my perspective. And the first thing I would say, and I think that this is a bit of a misconception, ADL fights all forms of hate. We take the lead when it comes to fighting anti-Semitism, but we're very much allies in the space of fighting all forms of hate, whether it's racism, attacks against the LGBTQ+ community, violence against Asians, racism, of course. So, for us, it's very important, and this is since the beginning. When we were founded in 1913, we've always been an organization that kind of straddled that particularistic, universalistic line of fighting all forms of hate. Second thing I would say is ADL is a very innovative organization. The best example I can provide is something called our Center for Technology and Society. Center for Technology and Society is an entity within ADL that fights hate in digital spaces. It's unbelievably innovative. We call it our office in Silicon Valley. These are people who've come from Facebook and Reddit and Twitter and these companies, and they're sort of fed up with all of the hate on those sites, and they want to give back. So they have technological expertise, and they have important connections in those spaces. The third thing I would say is our Center on Extremism really highlights ADL as an organization that tracks hate and that follows bad actors. Very important. Center on Extremism is about 30 threat intelligence analysts. ADL is the intelligence arm of the Jewish community. So these are people who are following bad actors through social media. Law enforcement needs a criminal predicate. They need a reason to follow bad actors through social media, but ADL doesn't as a nonprofit. So we're following all forms of extremists, white supremacists included, but not just white supremacists. And we supply that information to law enforcement, to elected officials. We get all kinds of threats. Last year, we supplied 1,300 tips to law enforcement. It's a very important function of ADL, a very important function in the community to keep our communities safe. The fourth thing I would say is that ADL is an organization that has a big voice. I think many of you have seen that big voice kind of played out in the past few months. Very high-profile issues like what happened with Kanye West or Kyrie Irving, pressing a company like Adidas to sever a $250 million contract doesn't come because just anybody says this is not right, you need to sever a contract. It comes because we have a reputation built since 1913, a very important reputation, a very important function in the Jewish community, which we maintain very carefully. That big voice means that we are also attacked. I mean, I've been around the Jewish world for a long time. I've never been part of an organization that is such a lightning rod, attacked nonstop on the left and the right. On the left, we are attacked because we support Israel. We support Israel's right to exist. It doesn't mean we're not critical of Israel, but it means that we support Israel's right to exist, and we are constantly attacked for that. A few months ago, there were protesters in front of our office. Our office is at 40th and 3rd Avenue, and we had 100 people in front of our office screaming "baby killer" at us and playing music. They were from Jewish Voice for Peace. And on the right, you have people attacking us and saying we are part of the radical left. We are trying to change this country, make it into a woke nation, all that sort of thing. So, this is who we are. And I think if we didn't have such a big voice, nobody would attack us. I say the big voice, it's because we matter, because we're relevant. And the last thing I would say is a lot of what I'm talking about feels very reactive, but we're also very proactive. ADL is a very large provider of anti-bias education in this country. More than 4 million students a year are touched by these programs nationwide, including in many schools in New Jersey. Anti-bias education, anti-bullying, anti-hate, and you'll hear me talk about this maybe a little bit later, but I press for this all the time. It is so important. English, math, reading, science. My wife is a teacher. Very important to teach these subjects, but it's also very important to teach children to respect one another, to celebrate difference, to celebrate diversity, more and more important. And the problem is that most of the time schools come to us after they've had an incident, and I want to be in the schools before. We've been ramping that up in New Jersey. I now have a dedicated person for education that focuses exclusively on New Jersey, but we can talk about that later. That's ADL in a nutshell. A very important function in the Jewish community, and really what drew me to this organization after so many years of being in the Jewish world.
Great, so I know we are going to touch back on a lot of these specific topics all the way through. Maybe before we head into your sort of work specifically on anti-Semitism, I did see Congressman Gottheimer walk in. Hi. And I invited, do you want to sort of give us a frame for big picture about sort of why all of this matters, what we're doing here? And if you do, there's a microphone here which you have to speak into because our friends at home can only hear us through microphones. And I didn't just bring that on him. We did have a conversation about it. Lest you worry, I might ever do that to you.
I can handle it if you did.
I know, but I don't want other people thinking I'm just, randomly willy-nilly picking on people.
I'm Jewish. Okay. Morning. Morning. Thank you very much for being here. Very grateful. Thank you, Rabbi, for doing this. And good morning, everyone. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
So I just thought, and I guess, Rabbi, would be most helpful, what if I talk a little bit about a frame of what's going on from a legislative perspective, what we're seeing?
Yeah, just like, why does this matter? Why are we doing this here?
So I think you all have recognized over the last few years in particular, we've seen a massive spike of incidents around the country of anti-Semitism. Obviously, anti-Semitism has been part of the Jewish world forever, with moments in our history, of course, where it's more pervasive than others. But it's always lurked under the surface. And I think it's fair to say, and obviously ADL statistics show this, right in 2021, up 25%, the number of incidents around the country, New Jersey being second highest in the country of incidents after New York, I believe, right? And the ADL reporting is phenomenal because it helps us track what's going on, and obviously, as was just said, helps law enforcement also understand what's going on. We saw really in the mid 2015, obviously 16, leading into the presidential, and after an enormous spike of activity that continues to be at record levels. And from a Congress perspective, and a legislative perspective, and a law enforcement perspective, we're seeing this globally and, of course, in the United States. And the question is, what do you do about it, right? I mean, are there things you can do about it? Social media, I think, has only really, and cable news and where other voices where extremists can really have a place to speak. It's been what was once seen as verboten. You didn't talk about it, or you were afraid to talk about it, or you talked about it in small circles. Now people just throw everything out there on social media and in other venues, and it just leads to more comments. And as more comments go out, the concern we've seen is that people get increasingly desensitized, right? And which I think is one of our biggest challenges we have, is that the bar keeps changing in terms of what's okay, right? What's acceptable. It used to be that if you said on social media, hey, a member of Congress is more concerned and works for Israel, not the United States, that is an anti-Semitic trope in itself, right? Now it's said so frequently that it's just people are like, well, whatever, we shouldn't necessarily respond to that. Or do we really want to react to that and bring more attention to the latest anti-Semitic comment that's made or trope that's thrown out, that whether or not, when a few years ago, you probably remember in the Congress, there were comments from some on the far left about Benjamins and and Israel having a trance on the world, which we immediately spoke out against. But there's so many comments that happen every day from both the far left and the far right, the white supremacist side, and of course, some of our colleagues on the far left, that my concern writ large is that people are becoming numb to these comments. And then these things are just get more and more pervasive, leading to more incidents, which is what we're seeing, right? And it's not just, of course, the most heinous incidents that lead to death, but it's also swastikas and this happens far too often, as you know, in classrooms, on desks, in bathrooms. I, as the Jewish member in the New Jersey delegation, everyone brings these things to me. You can't imagine every week how many swastikas are in schools. I mean, a number that you would be shocked about and say, are you kidding me? How's that possible? And the ADL and other organizations like it are phenomenal because then they go in and use these opportunities to educate. And I think that's the most important thing that we do and have to do in these moments, especially with young people, educate. Explain the history. The Holocaust that we saw with Kanye and Kyrie and others, the challenge, the biggest thing that scares me the most about them is that when public figures, that people look up to, whether it's a Kanye, whether it's an AOC, whether it's an Omar, right, when they make these comments that are based in ignorance, that people adopt them and think, well, if they're saying that, there must be some truth there, questioning the Holocaust, right? And I recently just introduced legislation on Holocaust education, requiring bipartisan legislation, requiring an analysis in schools all across the country about what are they actually teaching on the Holocaust, an audit of Holocaust education. To understand what's going on. Is it actually being taught? What's being taught? Is it just for 2 minutes? What are they saying about it? Because if you can't even teach about the Holocaust, well, the forgetting will happen much quicker. And so that's kind of where we are. I think there is a significant understanding that we have an alarming, a 5-alarm fire right now on anti-Semitism in the country and in the world, right? And the question will be, and is Israel, and as with the change in government in Israel, I worry about more comments from different sides. And what we're going into now. It's why we have money for nonprofit security grants and making sure we protect religious institutions and protect religious freedom. But the bottom line is, whether you're the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the extreme left, wherever it's coming from, I believe it is critical, and that's why I want to thank you for doing this. It is critical that we actually always speak out about it. We can't sweep any incident under the rug, and I don't allow that. That's sort of my rule. Wherever I see it, I call the superintendent. I don't care where in the state of New Jersey it is. I pick up the phone and say, what are you doing about this? well, we don't want to make a big deal about it. It's better just to, it was just some kid who didn't understand, right? But you have to actually use each of these moments as a teachable moment, in my opinion. And I just wanted, the ADL does a phenomenal job on this. Jonathan Grumet, who's a good friend, does an unbelievable, I think he's really done an unbelievable job as well. And I just want to, hopefully that covers it, but I don't know if that's what you were looking for. Was that okay?
I had no agenda, so it was great.
I just want to say that Congressman
Thanks.
Gottheimer is an extraordinary partner of ADL's. We have a real champion in Congress for this issue, and to thank him, he invited me to give testimony a few months ago to the Homeland Security Committee of Congress, on which he sits.
You did a great job, by the way.
Thank you. Really, really extraordinary partner, so thank you.
Thanks so much.
I'm honored to have him here
Thanks.
today.
Thanks. Thanks.
If you squeeze the bottom.
Oh, here we go. Thanks.
There you go.
Yeah. Sorry.
Terrific. So, perfect. So actually, that's a great segue to be able to maybe take a step back even. The sort of, as I organized questions, I sort of left the sort of, what do we do when those incidents happen questions for the end, right? So maybe first to define the problems differently. So I would love to just ask you to start by talking about what is anti-Semitism? If you could give us a definition, sort of how you evaluate a scenario or a situation, just to, we're all use the same language.
Thank you. So anti-Semitism, I mean, I feel like, this is a group that would say to itself, I know anti-Semitism, I know it when I see it, in reference to another court case I won't get into. For those who know, they can laugh. Anti-Semitism, look, I think anti-Semitism is a bit confusing for people. It's confusing for non-Jews for sure, but I think it's also confusing for Jews, because anti-Semitism does not look like any other form of social prejudice. And a lot of people think that all forms of social prejudice can kind of be lumped in together. If you're not Jewish, you think that anti-Semitism looks like racism, or looks like attacks against the Asian community, or looks like attacks against or harassment of the LGBTQ plus community. It doesn't. Obviously, it has something in common, but for the most part, it's different. Anti-Semitism is a series of conspiracy theories, tropes, 7 tropes to be specific, and those tropes look nothing like these other forms of social prejudice. And when thinking about what is anti-Semitism and being able to combat it, keeping those in mind are very important. And if you want to be, this is likely a group of Jews, but if you want to be allies in this space, you need to understand those tropes. I do a lot of corporate training. I speak in a lot of settings to non-Jews who want to be allies to the Jewish community, and understanding those tropes are the key. So what are those tropes? Well, the first one is about power. The idea that Jews control the media, that Jews control business, that Jews control government. This is an ongoing trope. It's existed for a very long time. And it's odd, because typically with social prejudice, you are putting somebody down. You're saying that they are lower than you are. But when you're saying that they're in control, that they have undue influence, you're elevating them. That's very different from other forms of social prejudice. The second is greed or money, something associated with that. You see that all the time, Jews being accused of having too much money, wielding too much money. The third is dual loyalty, the idea that Jews are not just loyal to their community, but they're also loyal to, or they're only loyal to their community, but not loyal to the broader community, maybe to the synagogue, not to the town. They're loyal to Israel, they're not loyal to the United States. The fourth is the deicide charge, the idea that Jews are responsible collectively for the killing of Christ. Now, you don't see this too much nowadays, because it was in 1967, Nostra Aetate, the Pope said that Jews are no longer collectively responsible for this. But for millennia, this had dominated anti-Semitism. It had dominated the way Jews and non-Jews interacted. And you still see it to some extent, and it's gotten some new life on social media. The fifth is Holocaust denial. Holocaust denial, so here, this has gotten new life on social media. For many years, we didn't see this. Obviously, a particularly pernicious form of anti-Semitism. The sixth is the blood libel charge, a really odd form of anti-Semitism, the idea that Jews use the blood of non-Jews for their rituals, for making matzah. And this has extended to this idea that Jews do not treat non-Jews properly. You see these kinds of accusations with the Palestinians. That's the sixth. And the seventh is anti-Israelism, when it rises to the level of anti-Semitism. Obviously, criticism of Israel, there's nothing wrong with it. People do it. People criticize the US. People criticize Israel. Nobody criticizes Israel more than Israelis themselves. But you just have to be on a bus in Israel or pick up a newspaper. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about when it rises to the level of anti-Semitism, which we can get into. Those are the 7 tropes. And if we think about it, where does that fit with violence against Asians? Where does that fit with harassment against the LGBTQ plus community? It doesn't. None of those would ever fit in that kind of rubric. So that's anti-Semitism. Really important to focus on those tropes. If you want more about this, we have a resource at ADL's website. It's called Anti-Semitism Uncovered. It's a great resource for understanding these 7 tropes. And we also have a series of videos. A lot of times they're used for students, college students, about those 7 tropes. They're about 1.5 minutes long, very, very illustrative.
So when Congressman Gottheimer was speaking a minute ago, he said that when incidents happen at schools, sometimes people sort of want to, and I'm presuming in those cases many of those people are not Jews, but I am making an assumption, that there's some sort of desire to like say, or feeling that it's not really such a big deal. And one of the things we spoke about also was the challenge that you're kind of referencing with the non-Jewish community and really identifying or naming anti-Semitism. Can you talk a little bit about if you think I think you do, there's a relationship between actually how the not Jewish community even looks at the Jewish community? Are we a religion? Are we an ethnicity? Are we a people? And how that actually muddies the waters about responding to anti-Semitism?
So I do this corporate training, and in that space, I talk a lot about this because it's very confusing for non-Jews to understand who are the Jews, or rather, what are the Jews. Jews are both a faith and an ethnicity, and that is extremely unique, extremely unusual. A faith, you have a theology. That's the sort of framework that most non-Jews have about Jews. But if you're also an ethnicity, you're a people. You have a language, you have holidays, you have customs, you have a homeland. All of this is very confusing, and it's very hard for people to kind of zero in on that. And if we think about it, there's almost nobody who fits the description, no group of people who fits the description of being both a faith and ethnicity besides the Jewish community. I do a podcast. It's called From the Front Lines, quick commercial advertisement. You can find it on Apple, SoundCloud, and Spotify. And about 6 months ago, I interviewed one of my colleagues. And I interviewed him because the question was, what are the Jews? And I said to him, are there another group of people that fit this description of being both a faith and an ethnicity? And he said there are almost none. The closest equivalent he can think of are Native Americans. So, the Sioux Nation, the Sioux people, yes, but they also had their own theology. The Cherokee Nation also have their own theology. That is the closest equivalent. And that is not a framework for people understanding who the Jews are. And again, in order to understand where Jews are coming from, you really need to understand this unique aspect of Jews. Otherwise, you're going to continue to see it through the lens of being a Lutheran or a Methodist or a Baptist, and not really understanding what is bothering you. In terms of those tropes, I will also say that I think what happens is people tend to excuse anti-Semitism or anti-Semitic acts because they don't understand that it's part of a broad array of, or a pattern of acts that have been going on for decades, hundreds of years, thousands of years. And as members of the Jewish community, we see this because we recognize the pattern. But a lot of times people say, oh, it's nothing, no big deal, and it's not no big deal because it's not just an isolated incident, it's part of a pattern. And that's the way to be an ally, to really understand that this is part of a pattern. So if you're explaining to somebody that this is anti-Semitic and this bothers me, you need to explain it in the context of these tropes. You need to explain it as being part of a pattern so that they understand that this has more serious consequences than just an offhanded comment that can be excused.
Thank you. Can you give us sort of maybe a little bit more information about what's happening with anti-Semitism in this country? My husband often lovingly accuses me of being like so Northeast centric that I don't know anything about America, which there's some truth to a little bit, not really, but sort of. But I know sort of we know the sort of the headlines, which is that we are in the second highest. We have the second highest incidence of anti-Semitic events happening right now, but sort of what's happening nationally, and then maybe zero in a little bit, in particular, obviously, on New Jersey.
So, I mentioned that we track anti-Semitic incidents, but what does that mean? It means that it's not just drawn from sort of a sense of anti-Semitic incidents or, looking at the media. The work of ADL's regional offices, I'm one of those offices, but we have 25. New York and New Jersey is the largest of those 25. We have 25 offices. And we are responding to anti-Semitic incidents. That's a really important function. I have 5 staff people whose job it is to respond to anti-Semitic incidents literally every single day. Every day of the week, we are, and again, I came into this position 2.5 years ago, and I was shocked by the volume of anti-Semitic incidents, the type, the frequency. Really, it's extraordinary. Every single day, responding to incidents. Our tally of the anti-Semitic incidents in this country is not from a survey. Typically, that's the way people take the temperature of anti-Semitism. They do a survey. Are you experiencing anti-Semitism? Are you worried about it? Are you changing your behavior because of it? And we do that too. But that's not what our audit of anti-Semitic incidents is, which the Congressman made reference to. Our audit is a compilation of what we've encountered over the course of the year, personally, as ADL, as these 25 offices. It's a unique way to take the temperature, and we've been doing it since 1979. So we have a very long track record to be able to compare. That audit of anti-Semitic incidents showed that in 2021, which was the most recent, we'll come out with the 2022 figures in a few months, 2021 was the highest year on record since we had ever started keeping track of this in 1979. And it was 700 more incidents than the year before. It's a huge jump, a very disturbing jump. And I think for me, what's most telling is that if you go back to 2013, you would have seen that we had encountered 1/4 of the number of incidents, around 750 incidents in 2013, and 2,717 incidents in 2022.
Can you just say what qualifies as an incident?
So an incident, and this is important because a lot of people confuse hate crimes and hate incidents. A hate crime is a crime, something you could be arrested for, something you could possibly go to jail for. It's a crime. A hate incident is not that. A hate incident could be something speech related. We have free speech in this country. If somebody comes up to you and calls you a dirty Jew on the street, or denies the Holocaust, or invokes one of these tropes, you would call that an incident of anti-Semitism. But nothing will happen to that person. We have the issue of the Goyim Defense League. The Goyim Defense League is a virulently white supremacist organization. They've committed hundreds and hundreds of incidents across the country this year, including in New Jersey. And part of what they do is they come up to people, Jews, in front of Jewish institutions. They taunt them. They say terrible things to them. They say, you should go back to Auschwitz, burn in the ovens, things like this. And they monetize this. So they have a live stream going, this is a camera while this is happening, and they're asking people around the world for money. And the worse the taunting, the more money they make. It's terrible. Nothing can happen to these people. They're not going to be arrested because this is free speech. They're walking up to somebody on the street, and unless it's a matter of imminent violence, which they know the limits that they can go up to, that nothing is going to happen to them. That is a hate incident. So ADL tracks both of these. Often you see the FBI hate crimes figures, the NYPD hate crimes figures. That's important. It's an important gauge, but those are crimes. And not everything that happens that's anti-Semitic is a crime. So we track it according to 3 categories: harassment, vandalism, and assault. Harassment, just like the kind of thing I mentioned with the Goyim Defense League. Goyim Defense League, think about the name there, how ridiculous that name is. And it's taunting the ADL. It's the GDL. They chose that name specifically to taunt our organization. Vandalism, so this could be like a swastika or other defacing of a Jewish institution or whatever it happens to be, or some sort of other graffiti, or assault, the most heinous form of anti-Semitism, physical violence against a Jew, which is specifically because they're Jew. You have to be able to prove bias motivation. The person wasn't just a Jew who was attacked, they were attacked because they were Jewish. So that's the way that we track it, the kinds of examples. But we also, when we break down the audit, we look, is it white supremacist? Is it Israel related? Is it taking place on college campuses? Is it taking place in certain parts of the country? In New Jersey, we break it down. There are 21 counties, I think, in New Jersey, and we break it down by county. Bergen County, by the way, happens to have the highest anti-Semitic number of the 21 counties in New Jersey, by far. And last year, the year before, they did not, but they sort of went far. And that's not so much because of communities like this, but it's because of more visibly identifiable communities like Teaneck. You know, if I look, and I'm the director for New York and New Jersey, and there are 82 counties between New York and New Jersey, and the 6 counties with the top number of anti-Semitic incidents are all communities or counties with a large Orthodox Jewish populations. You don't need visibly identifiable Jews to have anti-Semitism, but it helps.
So what's the relationship then? I know you sort of referenced the Goyim Defense League, the relationship that you are seeing between white nationalism and anti-Semitism and white nationalist activity.
So actually, I missed one part of your question, which is the numbers in New Jersey.
Right.
So, you know, I mentioned 2,717 incidents. If we look across the country, and ADL dealt with anti-Semitism in all 50 states. New York is number 1 in terms of anti-Semitism by far, and New Jersey is number 2. And being number 2, it's not very far behind. There were 416 incidents in New York and 370 in New Jersey, and most states have double-digit incidents. This is many, many more, and these are incidents that are verifiable, meaning we've gone back and can completely prove that they are anti-Semitism. We get many more incidents reported to our office. My office, just New York and New Jersey, has already had 2,100 incidents reported to us, for 2022. So that's what my office needs to deal with, and we need to, every one of those requires follow-up. Reaching out to victims, working with law enforcement, working with universities, working with social media, wherever it happens to take place. I have a person who's responsible for the Hasidic community, a person who's responsible for working with campuses, wherever it happens to be. So that's the situation we're dealing with in New Jersey. So in 2022
you had 2,200 incidents reported, and I guess about 800 total, let's say, in New York and New Jersey, if I do quick math on those two. How do you go from 2,200 to 800?
That's a really good question. So many of those incidents people report to us, they're not actually anti-Semitism. Not everybody focuses on what is anti-Semitism. You know, they think because a Jew was attacked that it's anti-Semitic, or because Israel was impugned that it's anti-Semitic, and not necessarily. It requires work on our part to work with the victims to help them understand that it's not. Sometimes we get duplicate reports. You know, if you encounter an anti-Semitic incident, please, please, please report it to us. ADL.org/report incident is the site to go to. But we'll get duplicate reports, especially if it's a particularly visible kind of thing. So that's how we go. The problem for us is that we need to act on every one of those, and it means that we are super busy. And my staff who does this kind of work also does community building work, also works with elected officials, and more we have less time to do that kind of proactive work because we're constantly being reactive.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You asked about white supremacists.
I was going to repeat it. It's okay, but go for it.
Yeah. So white supremacists. Well, look, it's a particular issue. We deal with anti-Semitism on the left and the right, as Congressman made reference to. But white supremacists are a particularly difficult issue for us. And of course, white supremacists, they have no love for many different communities. It's not just about attacks against the Jews. The group that I mentioned, the Goyim Defense League, they are particularly focused on Jews. They've carried out more than 400 acts this year alone. They grew from 75 acts the year before. It's because they monetize hate. They have a website, in addition to taunting Jews and making money from that, they have a website, they sell t-shirts and sweatshirts with anti-Semitic statements on there. They make a lot of money from that. You can find a backgrounder on our website. You can look up ADL, Goyim Defense League, and you'll find a whole backgrounder on who they are. What white supremacists, not all of them, but most of them believe, is that Jews are somehow in control. This is going back to the first trope that I mentioned, and that there is an effort to replace white people in this country with black and brown people. So that's the sort of basic idea of white supremacists. But who is pulling the strings here? Who's pulling the strings are the Jews. I mean, this was the statement in Charlottesville. This was, Jews will not replace us. This wasn't about Jews physically replacing. Our numbers are very small in this country. This is about Jews being in control. This is about Jews bringing black and brown people to this country. The person who killed all of the people at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. So he went in there as a white supremacist who believed that whites were being replaced by black and brown people. And what had happened was the week before, that synagogue held a program with HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. It's a pro-immigration kind of program. It happened to be a special Shabbat for a refugee Shabbat. So he had gone in there and he wanted to attack the Jewish community because they are the ones doing this. The hatred for black and brown people is clear, but you need to get to the source, the ones who are bringing in the black and brown people. The manifesto in Buffalo. So, the gunman in Buffalo in May who killed 10 people in the top supermarket there. So his manifesto was 180 pages long. And he went specifically to kill black people. He traveled 3 hours to kill black people. But his manifesto was filled with hatred for Jews. So that's sort of what we're dealing with when we're talking about white supremacy. By the way, I traveled to Buffalo. I was there for 3 days following this. I was there by Saturday night. So this you can ask me questions about it, but that was a particularly powerful moment for me where I really came face to face with people who were the victims of that. So white supremacy is an issue. It's an issue in the state of New Jersey. We have here in the state of New Jersey the prevalence of groups like the New Jersey European Heritage Association. New Jersey European Heritage Association is a white supremacist group that actually has New Jersey in its title. It's not limited to New Jersey. They've spread to New York, to California, and to Florida, but active here. The American Identity Movement, active on college campuses. The Patriot Front. There are quite a number of white supremacist groups, and we are constantly getting reports about this. I just this week had a report of white supremacist flyers, 50 of them, strewn on people's lawns in upstate New York, very close to where my brother lives. This was from the National Socialist Movement. We should also focus on the fact that, Congressman Gottheimer mentioned the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. These are not white supremacist groups. A lot of people confuse that. Proud Boys and Oath Keepers are, and they have a presence here as well. Proud Boys and Oath Keepers are far-right nationalist group, and they're a bit different from one another. These are the groups that are now under criminal indictment for January 6th. ADL, by the way, is co-counsel on the January 6th civil lawsuit. In addition to the criminal lawsuit going on now, there's a civil lawsuit against both the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, and we are co-counsel. And if we focus on why a group like ADL is co-counsel, it's because in order to prove conspiracy, this is the 1871 Ku Klux Klan law. In order to prove that it rises to the level of culpability, you need to prove conspiracy. That it wasn't just a group of people who came together for a protest and it got out of hand, but that they planned this. They planned it in advance. And how do you have that intelligence? You have it because ADL like I said at the beginning, follows bad actors through social media. In the weeks before January 6th, we were following these bad actors through social media, and we have this evidence to be able to present. It's in the discovery period now, but at some point in the next year or two, that case will come to trial, and our goal is to bankrupt both the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. So white supremacy is a particular issue in this country, getting worse. Part of that is social media, and part of it is a sort of moment where there is less social pressure for extremists to control their behavior. We see a general emboldening of extremists over the past 4 or 5 years, meaning they feel like they can do more and they're not going to get in trouble. At the end of the day, hate is controlled by civil society. Hate is controlled by civil society pushing it to the margins, saying what you are doing is not acceptable. It doesn't belong in civil society, and I'm going to push you to the margins where you can't have as much of an impact. But the past few years, we've seen extremists and extremist views become more normalized, and it begins to move to the mainstream. People taking sides in a polarized society where you're divided, and those on one side say this is wrong, but the other side begin to excuse it because they don't want to give the other side an advantage. And that's what we're seeing. So people just don't feel that same kind of pressure. And I'll give you a great example of this. We do something called the White Supremacist Propaganda Report. White supremacist propaganda. What is white supremacist propaganda? It's stickering and flyering and banner drops. You see this. You see it in New Jersey. A white supremacist group will come into a town, they'll put up stickers and flyers all over the town with a message about white power. It's terrorizing for many communities, and there'll be a URL, a website people can go to. They use it as a recruitment tool. You saw this with Kanye West. The banner that was draped over the freeway in Los Angeles, Kanye was right about the Jews. Right next to it was a site you can go to, goyimtv.tv. So that was the Goyim Defense League, and they were using this issue with Kanye West to bring visibility to their cause. It happened again. It happened in Westchester a week later. So it's out there. But our white supremacist propaganda report began in 2017. In 2017, there were 12 instances of white supremacist propaganda in the state of New Jersey. In 2021, there were 179. So that's a group of people who no longer feel inhibited from being so visible about their white supremacist views and see it as a vehicle for recruitment.
Can you talk also about sort of in the way that hate is not being pushed to the margins, another sort of space a lot of our, I would say adults and young, sort of older kids are in, which is the social media space and the gaming space, which you talked with me a little bit about when we spoke, which my children are not quite old enough, thankfully, yet to be playing the kinds of games where they're talking to other people online. But I understand from you that these are spaces that adults especially need to be paying close attention to.
Social media is a big problem. Social media is a big driver of hate. Social media is also great. It democratizes society. It gives people a voice. It gives everybody a voice, which is very important, but it also gives haters a voice. And that's become a big issue. The issue with social media is somehow finding a way to press these companies. Now, we have free speech in this country. These are private companies, and there's nothing that can be done about controlling that necessarily legislatively. I know there are lots of ways that are being looked at, but by and large, this is governed by Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Section 230 was created in 1996. It was created in the early days of the World Wide Web, and it said that content coming onto the web is the company that is sponsoring this is not responsible. Now, this is 180 degrees difference from traditional media. Newspaper, television, radio, they were responsible. If they put out content that they were somehow it was libelous or slanderous, they would be responsible. But social media, the decision was made that there's content coming from too many different sources, and they didn't want to stifle this new medium. Here we are, 26 years later, and we still have the same law. There is nothing governing the content on social media. So it's up to the social media companies themselves. They self-police. And over the past few years, there's been an enormous amount of pressure on these companies to put in place what's called content moderation policies. Policies which say, we will not allow hate on social media, and we will stop that from happening. We will suspend your account, whatever it happens to be, if we find it. There's been a real sea change. I mean, in 2018, Mark Zuckerberg stood before the world and he said, October 2018, I will never stop Holocaust denial on Facebook because I believe in free speech. I abhor it, but I'll never stop it because I believe in the free exchange of ideas. October 2020, he completely reversed that. He completely reversed it. He said, I will no longer allow Holocaust denial on social media. That matters. And on TikTok, and on Instagram, and on Snapchat, and on Twitter, and all of these places, there are now policies in place. That's important. But enforcement of those policies, and ADL played a big role in pressing social media companies to have those policies, and now we play a big role in enforcement. Enforcement is a problem. If you go to Facebook today, you will find sites devoted to Holocaust denial, and in multiple languages. So, they're not catching everything, and we all play a role. People ask me all the time what to do about anti-Semitism. This is a big role that people can play. Reporting hate and misinformation on social media is the responsibility of all of us. Nobody wants their account suspended. Nobody wants their account revoked. And if they know that people are looking at what's there, they will think twice about what they like, what they comment on, what they share. So that's an important role that we can all play. It's very easy to report this kind of stuff to all of these companies. And if you have a problem, come to us. Just take a screenshot of what you've done, put it in adl.org/report incident, just like you're reporting any incident. And our Center for Technology and Society will reach out to the top levels of those companies and try and help you with this. We do it every day of the week. So that's social media, a big issue. Gaming. People don't focus so much on gaming. They think of gaming as a recreational activity, a leisure activity. It is another form of social media. People are interacting with others in these game spaces. It's another form of social media, and it's definitely not regulated, but it's also not monitored. And there has been a tremendous rise in harassment in the gaming space and white supremacy in the gaming space. ADL puts out a gaming report. Again, you can Google this. Every year, we just came out with our gaming report, and it showed that from 2021 to 2022, this was a survey, that 8% of people in 2021 reported encountering white supremacy as part of their gaming experience. That jumped to 20%. 20% of the people we surveyed said they'd encountered white supremacy as part of their gaming experience. And something like 65% had been harassed in gaming spaces. This isn't just young people. People of all ages play games. It's a huge industry, and it's very, very important. We have lots of recommendations in that report about what to do, but if you're a parent, talking to your kids and at least knowing who they're interacting with, who they're playing with, who else is in that space, and to be wary of who else is in that space is really important. You can find my podcasts on this too. If you go to From the Front Lines, my podcasts are 10 minutes long. They're very small, bite-sized chunks. I take one issue each week that I think is really important, and my issue 2 weeks ago was gaming.
Great. So I've sort of been offering us along the way sort of what to do, right, in terms of reporting or learning or talking to each other, which is really helpful. I want to maybe move to this more of this sort of solutioning for us, and I'll start asking the question just about schools. We had some focused conversations before the break with our 5th and 6th graders. When I say we, I guess I mean organized by Jennifer Katz-Goldstein, who's our JJP director back there, and me. And because I had sort of a request to talk with some of our older elementary school students and middle school students about what they were experiencing. Between Rabbi Scheffler and me, we work with all of the rest of the middle and high school students, and Ethan and Jess and Barty, and sort of all the ways that we are interacting formally and informally with our teens. And so it's a big question, and you'll do with it what you want, because there's a big range. But knowing that, I would say I don't know a young person in, let's say, middle school enough, whether through college, who hasn't had some personal interaction with either a swastika in a bathroom or on a desk or something more overt than that. How can we best support our kids in those moments? We know we can report, right? We know we can go on the website. You know, the kids say to us, well, what am I supposed to do? What do I do if I see this? So that's one kind of question. There's also a lot of our older teens in the room now who are in some way close to thinking about college, right? And so not just what's happening on college campuses, but if I'm a parent or a teenager and I'm thinking about where I want to go to school, right? When I'm walking around a college campus on a tour, what are the kinds of places I want to be looking at or thinking about, the kind of questions I want to ask in terms of really thinking about safe spaces for us as we sort of grow in our Jewish adulthood lives?
So first of all, the swastika question. I mean, to the young people in this room, I mean, you should know that this is not how things always were. I did not grow up with swastikas in the school. I mean, this is just not a part of the reality. It just sort of would have been unheard of. And you're right, it's literally every couple days there's another swastika. I said my wife is a teacher. I think she has a swastika in her school every 6 months, somewhere in the bathroom, whatever. And who knows, is it anti-Semitism? Is it just somebody who thinks that by drawing this controversial symbol, they'll get attention, they'll do something bad to the school? Like, it's not even clear that it's anti-Semitism. And by the way, if you think about it, is it simply anti-Semitism? This is a symbol of the Nazis. This country went to war against the Nazis. More than 400,000 Americans lost their lives fighting against this symbol. Why is this exclusively a Jewish issue? For those who walk around talking about, I mean, we saw this with Kanye West, talking about support for Hitler, support for the Nazis. It's not just anti-Jewish. I don't know why we've adopted it as being solely anti-Jewish. It's anti-American. And I think in terms of how to deal with it, it's very important to universalize this. I talk about this with people all the time. This isn't just a problem for the Jewish students in the school. It's a problem for everybody. And everybody needs to think about it. If you want to think about how to respond to it, or if you're a student and want to think about what to say, you should let people know that this should be a problem for all of us. And you know, what it symbolizes is a problem for all of us. You know, we do a lot of work with the schools when there are symbols of hate. It becomes a teachable moment, as the congressman said, and it's very important to use it in that way. We have programs like No Place for Hate. Many of the schools we have about 70 schools in New Jersey that are involved with No Place for Hate. No Place for Hate is a program that is generated by parents, teachers, students, and administrators in a school, where they go through a series of activities over the course of the school year that show this school is no place for hate. And at the end of the year, they get a big banner that says we're no place for hate. They come to a big ceremony. It's a really nice thing. We have almost 400 schools in New York and New Jersey that are going through that program right now. We've never had so much interest in these programs, but very important. A world of difference. These are anti-bias, anti-hate, anti-bullying programs. Really important to bring these to the schools. So that's the way I would respond to it. In terms of college campuses, so you know, I think it's really important to sort of focus on this idea that college campuses have become a place that a lot of people focus their fears on, but Jewish students are not experiencing terrible anti-Semitism on their campuses every single day of the week. It's not a horrific experience to go to these campuses and to be a Jew by and large. If we think of a place like Columbia or Rutgers, these are campuses where I have quite a number of incidents that I deal with, but they have some of the richest Jewish life you can imagine. Very well-funded Hillels, an incredible number of activities, Shabbat services, dinners, programs, trips. It's kind of, I mean, and something that when I was a student, I went to Penn, like the rabbi. When I was a student, I went to a place with a very rich Hillel, but it was nothing like the experience that Jewish students can have today. The access that they have, it's really extraordinary. And I think we need to come not from a place of how terrible it is, but from a place of how rich Jewish life is. And from time to time on those campuses, students will experience difficulties, especially if they are visibly Jewish in some way, or their support, or they have some sort of outward support of Israel. That has become a litmus test in some places, where if you support Israel, you somehow become an evil person, a person who is not interested in human rights, not interested in rights of others, and that's a problem. And co-opting the term Zionist, so that's become the word. You know, if you're a Zionist, people don't even understand what Zionism is. They equate it with a blanket support of Israel. That is not what Zionism is. Zionism is the right of the state of Israel to exist, not free from criticism, but the right of the state of Israel to exist. The vast majority of American Jews believe in the right of Israel to exist. Every survey shows that. Well over 80%. Well over 80% see Israel as a core piece of their identity. So if you've created a litmus test that says that you cannot be a Zionist and be in the spaces where you're fighting against racism or for voting rights or against harassment against the LGBTQ plus community, if that's your litmus test, then that's a real problem, because you're essentially saying if you are Jewish, it's very easy to equate Zionism with being Jewish. If you are Jewish, then you are excluded. So we have the case of what happened at UC Berkeley. UC Berkeley Law School in September, the Muslim student organization stood up and they said, we will no longer allow Zionists in our space. We will not allow them to come into our facility, whatever it is. We will not allow them to speak. We will not allow them to be a part of our world. And we want all of the other organizations, the faith and ethnic organizations, to join us. So they reached out to the Black student organization, the Asian student organization. They asked them to all sign a pledge that said that. By the time they got to 6 or 7 organizations, suddenly this became visible. It was several weeks after it started. Why did it become visible? Because a person put it out in an article. His name is Marcus, and he put it out there, and then Barbara Streisand tweeted it. And suddenly everybody knew about what was going on at UC Berkeley Law School. It became an issue. But what happened in that case was that Erwin Chemerinsky, a name maybe you all know about UC Berkeley Law School, but maybe you don't know the name Erwin Chemerinsky. Erwin Chemerinsky is the dean of Berkeley Law School. And he happens to be a very good partner of ADL's. We work with him a lot. Erwin Chemerinsky stood up and he said, I am a person who is very critical of the state of Israel. That happens to be my politics. But I'm a Zionist. I believe in the right of the state of Israel to exist. And if you are saying what you're saying that me, as the dean of the law school, I'm not allowed in your space. And I'm not allowed in your space as the Asian student organization or the Black student organization. And that meant more than anything in terms of combating anti-Semitism on that campus and this kind of anti-Israel sentiment, because he stood up and he said what wasn't being said, which is really what Zionism is and what this means to him as a Jew being excluded. That's the situation we live with on campus. It's a bit of a dichotomy of rich Jewish life in many of these places, but from time to time, needing to deal with very difficult circumstances.
And I'll just, having a break for a second from the ADL here, I'll say especially, the Sisterhood and the Men's Club hosted a conversation earlier this year. Last year, when was it? I don't know. December? sort of post-Israel election, sort of what now kind of conversation as we think about sort of especially where our voices, as I said on Friday night, will be really important, is in figuring out how we will continue to love and lift up and support Israel, even when we have major concerns, as we do in many cases with the sort of what's happening with the new government right now. So come to Israel with me in November, and we'll be able to do that even more meaningfully. Okay.
There's nothing wrong with being critical of Israel. There's nothing wrong with being critical of the United States. It doesn't make you un-American to be critical of the United States. In fact, maybe it makes you more American. You care about this country.
Beautiful. So it's 11:04. Do you have a few minutes for questions? Great. Okay, so there are a lot of things we didn't touch on just because we could talk forever. So I'm aware of the questions that even are on my sheet that I didn't get to ask. So maybe you'll have some of those questions. I think maybe in the interest of time, I'll take a couple and then we'll let you respond to them because maybe there'll be overlapping questions that we can sort of put together. So I'm going to repeat questions so you don't have to get up and run to the microphone, and that way our friends at home will also hear what people are asking. Does that sound good? Great. Liz, I saw your hand pop up. Yeah.
Scott, thank you. My first question, my only question is, how do we deal with kind of a lot of the solutions you're talking about in the situation from UC Berkeley, I think is a perfect example, where the solution to the problem kind of reinforces that first trope of undue power and influence.
Yeah.
So the question that Liz asked, I mean, if somebody wants to run the mic around, that's fine with me. It might be hard for me to do both. But that question was, how do we deal with the challenge of the trope of power and also the reality of power that exists? Is that what you're asking?
But not even about the reality. Like,
Here, Amy's going to give you the mic.
Sure. I don't want to say it's a universal reality, but in a lot of the situations, we use, we find allies in positions of power, like at UC Berkeley, or how the ADL works for 110 years now to foster relationships, but does not also sometimes reinforce the trope of power and influence and add fodder to the fire that's also being put out at the same time.
Great. So do you want to respond, or should we take a couple? What do you think? Well,
Up to you.
well,
Happy to respond. So you're right. You're right. I mean, when probably the most visible case was the Kanye case. Here you have ADL reaching out, using its big voice, and pressing Adidas, pressing all of these companies. And here we're accused of using this power in this way, undue influence, and it's proven. So that is an issue. The problem is that in cases, very visible cases like this, you have no choice. You have no choice but to make sure that people speak out against it, that people use their bully pulpit to speak out against it. Because what we've seen in a case like Kanye, where he has so many followers, 30 million followers on Twitter, when you have that kind of voice, you have no choice. People need to say this is wrong. Everybody needs to hear that this is wrong. And we saw over the past few months anti-Semitism becoming normalized. And that's not something we can tolerate. So at some point, you need to be able to speak out. It's not the way that we fight anti-Semitism all the time. Sometimes it's speaking out by people who are not as visible. Sometimes it's by these kinds of programs. Sometimes it's on social media, just helping people to understand what they can do. But it is true, unless ADL uses its voice, unless the Jewish community uses its voice, we're not going to be able to combat this. People need to hear that this is wrong, and they need to hear it from people in positions of power and authority, that these are people that they respect, and to say this does not fit with our values, to put in place laws that fit with it. But you're right, it can prove the trope.
Great. Ashley.
So I'm wondering what Jewish people did wrong, or why they deserve all these anti-Semitic acts and things.
Great. So Ashley Ackerman just asked, what did Jewish people do wrong that they deserve all of these acts of anti-Semitism and hate? Did I get it right?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. I'm not sure I have a full answer for that, but I have a partial answer. Jews have always been different. I would say that they dared to be different. In ancient times, Jews were monotheistic. Monotheistic means you believe in one God. That was odd. Ancient times were a time where people were polytheistic. They believed in many gods. And this group of people came along and said, we only believe in one God. And people said, what are you talking about? How can you only have one God? That doesn't make any sense. To our ears, it makes total sense. This is what we grew up with. It's what we're used to. But in ancient times, that was just considered weird. Then you have, you come along to a time when Jesus Christ is accepted by a large number of people as the Messiah. And this group says, no, we're not going to accept. And then a large group of people begin to accept Islam and the Prophet Muhammad. And this group of people says, no, we're not going to accept. And then you have a loss of sovereignty. A group of people who no longer have a nation and are dispersed. So they're living not only as being a bit different, but they're living as a minority group wherever they happen to live. And a minority group that is bucking the trend, that is not going along with the majority. All of these are ingredients for animosity, for suspicion, for being used as a scapegoat. And these kinds of tropes, these ideas of greed or power, all of these dual loyalty, all of these things begin to develop in response to those circumstances. And suddenly, after thousands of years, Jews have a homeland, sovereignty again, which changed the dynamic, but it also made Israel the sort of Jew among nations, where a lot of these kinds of tropes are attributed to a nation as opposed to individual people. And that's where that last trope came from. So it continues to this day. These things are sort of long-standing. We live in a multicultural society here in the United States. But unfortunately, and I probably should have said this early on, I usually do. Thank you for making me think of it. This is not just about anti-Semitism. We do not live in a vacuum. Jews are not the only ones being attacked. Hate is on the rise in this country, not just anti-Semitism, all forms of hate. And in fact, if you look at the FBI hate crimes data, you will see that the group that is attacked more than any other group it's the black community. The LGBTQ plus community online is harassed more than any other group. As a faith-based group, and especially out of proportion to our numbers, we are attacked, but there's a general rise in hate in this country. It's not just about the Jewish community.
Rabbi Scheffler, could you give us a summary or a composite question or something from our friends at home?
Yeah, well, we had some questions about the distinction between anti-Zionism and legitimate criticism of Israel. Okay, yeah, but you touched on that and also on campuses and BDS, you touched on that. So I would say that the question is remaining that, you might say more on those if you'd like, but the question remaining that we haven't touched on is from Barton, who asks, why are reps in D.C., parentheses, Omar, Khalid, etc., not being sanctioned or losing committee positions based on their vile statements?
So I'll repeat the question, unless you want to repeat the question as you answer it. At home, nobody can hear unless they have a microphone.
Go ahead.
The question was just sort of acknowledging that there were some questions about the sort of line between criticism of Israel and anti-Zionism, college campuses and BDS, which we think we've touched on a bit, and now a question about why some of the very, very, very left-wing outspoken representatives in Congress are not being sanctioned for their vile speech, I think is the language that you read. I'm just repeating.
So I've mentioned a few times there's nothing wrong with criticism of Israel. The question is, when does that criticism rise to the level of anti-Semitism? And here we use the working definition of anti-Semitism, sometimes known as the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which talks about the 3 Ds. The 3 Ds are delegitimization, demonization, and double standard. And when it hits one of those 3 Ds is when it rises to the level of anti-Semitism. Delegitimization, when in addition to criticizing Israel, you also delegitimize the state. You say it has no right to exist. So in addition to saying that you're not happy with the policy of Israel in the in the settlements or what they've done in Gaza or something like that. You also say Israel is a colonial entity. It never should have come into power, into being in 1948. Maybe we put that in the American context. You know, if you were critical of the Americans and said you're not happy with what they did in Iraq or the pullout from Afghanistan or something like that, and at the same time you talk about the revolutionaries had no right to take the US from the British. It sounds ridiculous in the American context, but it's a similar idea of saying that this country has no right to exist while you're criticizing the country. Second is demonization. When you demonize the state, it's often when you're comparing Israel to the Nazis, you're saying what they're doing is similar to what the Nazis did to Jews in the Holocaust or something like that. You're calling it some sort of evil entity. You can criticize the state, but when you do that to the state as well, that rises to the level of anti-Semitism. And the third is double standard. When you hold Israel
about these, we try to keep a really open dialogue about comments that are made, and to her, I try to listen to her position, where she's from, and I try to explain to her why the comments she's making are often misguided. But here's the bigger challenge we have, and we decided this as a group. When we put out a broad statement or a resolution, and ADL obviously, does what they do. When we in Congress put out a resolution, some of the far left and far right members use it to immediately raise an enormous amount of money, and actually they love it. So they love when we attack them, because they then use it immediately as a tool to get more attention for what they've said and raise money. I mean, so when I make comments about Representative Omar or Rashid Tlaib, they are immediately within hours packaged. I'm terrible human being Josh. It's put on a fundraising email that they then send to their lists to raise money for them, and it's very effective. They get more followers. They have millions of Twitter followers, which I don't have, right? And they literally, and there's a lot of sharing that goes on between these groups. So groups like If Not Now, which you may have seen online, which is run by a young Jewish woman, I think, right? If Not Now?
Jewish man, yeah.
Jewish man, okay. Run by a young person who, if you followed If Not Now, you may be as repulsed by it as I would. They hiding under the cover of a Jewish man puts out all of these what I consider anti-Semitic comments, and then they all share lists with each other. They retweet each other's stuff. There's many groups that do this, and it just gives, and believe it or not, groups that you'd perceive as more mainstream, that like J Street, which I have my strong feelings about, then they take this information, they all use it as a tool to get more attention and raise money. So this is a very big debate we have all of the time, those of us in the Congress who want to speak out on these issues, and how do we handle this and how do we deal with it? When do we speak out as a group? How will they use it against us? How will they raise money? I don't want to help them raise more money, right? So this is a big, anyway, I just want you to understand it's a debate. It's not like we just ignore these sort of things. We're obviously speaking out against Santos, which who everybody is, right? Who has made comments like, as you saw, which, confound me on many levels, being Jewish, and other comments that, associating with family with the Holocaust when it appears to be untrue, but everything, he's just a book of fiction. So anyway, I just want you to know it's not as if we ignore these things, it's just a debate that happens. Thanks.
It's a really good point about knowing when to speak out. For example, the Goyim Defense League, we advise people all the time, don't do anything with this, because it's exactly what they want. They want you to take these flyers and put them on social media and say, isn't this terrible? Because that's the way they get visibility. So knowing when to speak out is really important. And same on college campuses, by the way.
Thank you. So there's so much to digest and unpack, and I would say for all of us just to hear how many times Scott reference specific materials and resources that are available through the ADL for us, whether as individual, citizens and people, whether we're reporting crimes that we're experiencing for us or around, whether it's educational opportunities for classrooms or other more organized settings for parents, that from your podcast to sort of the stuff on the website. So I really want to encourage everybody to spend some time sort of digging through all of those resources. We are so lucky that you joined us today. Thank you so much for your time and for your candor and for all the ways that you sort of brought us into this conversation, and for also, I would say, empowering us to make sure that we use our voices and our ability to sort of exist and make the world to not let hate live in the center, right? And not just for us, as you said, right? That as hate becomes sort of more prevalent and more almost accepted around us, to figure out how we can help move it back out to the margins, where it has sort of creeped in the interim. So I'm trying to wrap up. So is it okay? Very quickly.
Is there a possibility that you could send out a list of what those different things that we could access? Because
I think if you go on the ADL website, there's like a resources tab.
right.
Yeah, I'm happy to share a list with
Okay, great.
her, because these are sort of basic resources that I often talk about. I can
Great.
they're
And then
very
we can
easy to share a
disseminate.
list.
Absolutely.
And
Thank you, Jane. Good
she
question.
can send it out.
Good. Wonderful.
And I just want to say thank you as well.
I see you. One sec.
Okay, so thank you as well. This has been great, and I hope that you'll continue to be a partner with us. We have a program called the Signature Synagogue Program.
Yep.
Signature Synagogue Program is a program where synagogues partner with ADL. They'll do an annual program. They'll do training for their teens called Words to Action on how to prepare them for college to fight anti-Semitism. And it's an important way for synagogues to be connected in the New York, New Jersey area to ADL and sort of continue this conversation.
Yeah. So I think this is an obvious next step for us for sure. And interestingly, I didn't know about it until you and I met to talk 2 weeks ago or whenever it was, which also just speaks to the importance of all of this ongoing education and learning together. Marnie, I saw your hand up.
So your social justice e-blast has contained links to the ADL website in the past,
Right.
in the recent past,
Yeah.
that have covered a lot of what we've discussed, and we're happy to put out
Great.
more e-blasts.
Perfect. So Marnie points out that it's true. The Tuesday social justice e-blast that goes out through Barnert does have, and I know we send you a lot of emails, and I know you pour through them with your very wonderful fine-tooth comb. And this is a great place to go look for resources that have already been going out, and maybe when we get that from Scott, we'll make sure it goes out through all of our different channels, which again, we know you wait with bated breath to receive and read with great care. But really, actually, all joking aside, we do work really hard and thoughtfully about what we do send. So it is a good place to go look for resources. So, Scott, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to Matt and Liz for inviting me.
Thank you to Matt and Liz for sort of suggesting that we have this conversation, and the schedule gods aligned and got to be here together. Thank you for all you're doing for all of us. And if you are a self-defined teen or a parent of a self-defined teen, whether or not that person is here with you, we would love to continue talking for a few minutes if you would like.